this is lecture 13 of HUL256. We have one lecture to make up because I didn't hold class this past Monday. So we are over half the course, and as I said in the tutorials yesterday, we have moved on to another section of the semester where primarily, at least for the next few weeks, we'll be talking about issues in this area of philosophy called philosophy of science. And the reason we're doing that is that at least one space in which the term critical thinking gets used is in the context of scientific thinking, and the contrasts are made between science and superstition, science and faith, or science and blind. Sometimes people talk about blind faith, and we had a couple of these discussions in yesterday's tutorials. Also, we have a tutorial tomorrow where I'll invite you to think a little bit about those issues, but those are the issues that then will take up our lecture time as well, starting from next week. And the material for today, for the next two lectures, which is material on informal fallacies from Hurley, are in a way like bridges to, well, I wouldn't say bridges to this material, but apply regardless of the content of what you're talking about. Right? We're talking about good reasoning. I mean, good reasoning is one aspect of it, is the skill aspect of it. There's also the disposition, motivation aspect of it, and the application aspect of it. So one way of seeing what we're doing is we're looking at different applications of the same set of tools. But you'll see that in the case of informal fallacies, the sorts of problems that they reveal are really quite common, regardless of the domain in question. And let me just turn to the textbook. What's the difference between an informal fallacy and a formal fallacy? Before we even talk about that, what does the term fallacy mean? What do you think when people talk about fallacy, fallacious? What do they mean by those terms? Anyone?
Sure, maybe something to misguide people.
Yeah, fallacy is basically a fancy word for mistake. So it doesn't have to be done with the intention of misguiding someone, but it's a mistake of reasoning.
It's basically a wrong with nothing to wrong. It is wrong.
It's wrong. It's a mistake. Fallacious means it's mistaken. And what we're going to do is identify some kinds of characteristic mistakes that people can make in reasoning. And the thought is, once you have these labels, just as we had, you discussed that cognitive, emotive meaning, those labels allow you to kind of see phenomena in a sharper kind of perspective. And in the context of these fallacies, what I'd like you to get out from it is essentially from this 1 week's worth of lectures and readings, get some practice as able to sort of just spot when a certain kind of mistaken reasoning is occurring, when a certain kind of well, what's wrong with that pattern? Why is it that reasoning of that kind is mistaken? And in practice, in the context of whatever debate it is you're having, in whatever context, what can you do to either avoid the fallacy in your own thinking or respond to somebody else when they're making that fallacy. That's the broad goals for this week. You see, they're obviously connected to things we've done before. In fact, the stuff on fallacies of relevance is quite directly connected to the material that, for instance, Sujoy talked about in his lecture on advertisement. So we'll be looking, as you see from the textbook, there are a whole bunch of different fallacies that Hurley has categorized, and really just for shortage of time, we're just going to look at two of these categories: the category called fallacies of relevance, and then this category called fallacies of presumption. That's going to be the set of fallacies um, uh, of interest to us. And the fallacies of relevance have to do well, those are the things we're going to talk about today, and maybe started into that question by asking somebody to read this passage. How logical are you? Anyone?
May I go?
Yeah.
From where? How logical are you?
Yeah, just that.
How logical are you? Suppose your parents are urging you to spend more time on your studies and less time on social activities. You reply by pointing out that each of them had a C average upon graduation from college and each was a member of multiple social organizations on campus. So, why should you listen to them? Do you think this rebuttal is sufficient to dismiss their recommendations?
Okay, so let me ask you that question. Do you think that if your parents are asking you to spend more time on your studies, and you tell them, hey, when you guys were in college, you didn't spend time on your studies, so why are you telling me that? Good rebuttal? What could they say in response?
I think so it basically depends on situation.
Sorry?
I think so basically it depends on situation. What was the condition or situation was at their time, or what is the condition now at this time.
Okay,
Maybe.
Sujit?
Yes, sir, I was saying that if there may be also a situation where they can make us understand that not studying how hard life can be if we don't study and just trying to be in comfort zone.
So you're arguing from a perspective where it's not enough to say to them that, look, you guys also did exactly what I'm doing. Because you're saying, look, well, maybe they can tell you something that you don't know right now.
Yeah, that is.
Purvi.
So I think that giving this argument that you had C average in your college, so why are you asking me, is not a correct justification because they know that what difficulties you face if you don't have a good grade. So they are just giving you a suggestion that you should not do repeat our mistakes. But it can also be negated, like in the sense that in today's world, extracurriculars are also important as important as studies. So maybe if the argument was a bit different, that not saying that you had C average, so you should not tell me to study, but if the argument was say that the social activities will help me in future and is building my characters, that argument is more plausible.
Okay, so your point is, I think, similar to Sujit's point that this may be the voice of experience speaking, and just because they've been in the same boat doesn't mean that they should be dismissed. Mukul.
Actually, sir, Purvi already said what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that they must have realized that, uh, uh, like, if they would have studied, then life would have been much better for them, and they don't want their child to make the same mistakes as they did. So it's not right to just discard their argument.
Okay, so all of you have done something which is not in the text, which is suggest that there's maybe some kind of reasoning going on. There's some reason why your parents think you should spend more time on your studies and less time on social activities. Um, Maybe because if we don't do that, things are going to go badly for you. The passage doesn't tell us what that justification is. And what you have said, and this is my way of characterizing what a bunch of you said, that argument, those reasons for why it's a good thing to spend more time on your studies and less time on social activities, that reason isn't defeated by pointing out some fact about the reasoners. And there's a fact about, well, is this a good thing or a bad thing? There's a separate fact, which is who are the people who are telling me whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And one way of framing your claim, there's no reason why you should have framed it this way, is whether or not your parents studied in college or whatever, had a C average upon graduation from college, is not relevant to the question of whether their reasons are good reasons or not. And again, as whatever critical thinkers, we're in the business of figuring out what reasons are good reasons, and that's why um, this information that each of them had a C average, etc., is so I'm not able to select it. That this information maybe is actually not relevant to the point they're making. Um, of course, I think Sujit and Purvi pointed out that maybe it has this further relevance, and maybe we should listen to them more because they are doing what we did and they suffered. So whatever, they have some, they're trying to warn us um, um, about their suffering. Uh, maybe not. But uh, the broad claim of interest in this uh, in this set of fallacies, the fallacies of relevance, is always going to be some argument is given. We're interested in obviously understanding whether the premises provide good reasons to support the conclusion, and what we're given, insofar as we have fallacies of, insofar as there are such things as fallacies of relevance, we're given considerations that are not good reasons to support the conclusions because they don't have uh, uh, they're not, well, because they're not relevant to the truth of the conclusions. And what Hurley does is just provide a whole menu of these uh, these examples. Well, we won't have time to go through all of them, but I'd like to go through some of the major ones. So the things that I'd like to focus on are uh, bag. So maybe I won't type them up. I'm going to skip this appeal to force, appeal to pity. What I have to focus on is number 3, which we already looked at a little bit, appeal to the people. Looked at in the discussion of Nazi propaganda. We'll look at number 5. Number 4 is ad hominem arguments. We'll just skip this accident. We'll look at straw man. And some of these videos, we've already talked about straw mans in the past. Number 7. Number 8 is red herring. Now, some of these are more likely to be familiar than others. I'm assuming that many of you would have heard of straw man. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
What about red herring? How many of you have heard of red herring? No? And what about ad hominem arguments? Have people heard of that?
No.
Okay. So the point of all
Yes,
this,
sir.
yeah,
I didn't-
Hemant, you've heard of ad hominem arguments. Okay, good. It's never going to be a particularly interesting task to be given a definition of one of these arguments or be asked to say, give me 3 examples of this kind of bad argument. The point of the labels is not that they have some kind of necessarily inherent interest in themselves. The point of the labels is just so that it makes it easier to spot certain kinds of reasoning going wrong. So the reason I'm saying this is don't get too hung up on whether you got the label right. That's a kind of secondary question, or that's just a tool. The label is just a tool towards getting better at finding the bad arguments. Accuracy of label is not something that's all that important, in itself. In other words, if you see some fallacious argument, look, is this a straw man? Is this a red herring? What kind of problem is it? To me, that's a less important question. The more important point is say you see an argument and you think, hey, here's why this argument, these premises don't provide good reasons to believe in the conclusion. And hey, I can't remember now which basket this particular fallacy has fallen in. So these names of fallacies are really means towards an end. That's the reason I'm pointing this out to you. And what Hurley does is essentially under each of these things gives a bunch of examples and then characterizes what those problems are. So let's just start. We'll start with not the first in the list, because that's, I think, the first 2 are not so difficult to figure out. We'll start with the appeal to the people. Nearly everyone wants to be loved, esteemed, admired, etc., etc. The appeal to the people uses these desires to get the reader or listener to accept a conclusion. 2 approaches are involved, one of them direct, the other indirect. So the idea between this direct indirect distinction is that in the direct case, you're addressing a crowd of people, a mob, a political rally, and you're trying to fire them up to believe in certain kinds of things. That's the case of the direct appeal to the people. In the indirect appeal to the people, you're addressing maybe some one person, and you're saying, hey, all of these people believe something, and therefore you should also believe it. So since we had some Nazi examples before the break, if you remember, we saw those posters, we saw those Nazi posters where you see that the whole crowd of people behind Hitler. And well, the point of the post is to make the person feel like, well, the people are with this person and therefore I should be with that person as well. So that's a kind of indirect argument. That's the indirect appeal to the people. You're saying, well, most people are following Hitler, so maybe you should as well. Anyone remember what the effect was that this person used to describe it? The person that Karthik Narayan Swami used to describe this kind of propaganda? Remember this term, bandwagon effect?
Sir, we remember bandwagon effect. Yes, sir.
So the bandwagon effect is like one kind of special case of the appeal to the people in its indirect sense. And so the point here is in the direct approach, you're addressing a people here. There's a nice this kind of format. You're the arguer, the person who's making this fallacy. You're appealing to some kind of audience, and you're taking advantage of some kinds of insecurity or need, positively or negatively, and based on that vulnerability of theirs, you are giving the message that if they believe what you want them to believe, then that vulnerability will be removed. And so it could be of very many kinds. I just wanted to give you a short clip because Hurley uses it, talks about it. That's this Daisy commercial. I'm going to play you the Daisy commercial actually. In 1 second. I have to stop sharing. Start sharing here. Can you see the screen? Well, I'll set it.
Yes, sir.
Audio. Hang on 1 second. That.
The Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Okay, I'm going to leave that. Thoughts, reactions to that? Why is it a message to vote for President Johnson?
So, I think they want to suggest that the President Johnson favors peace. So you shall
Yes,
vote.
also, sir, the opponents, which name was I think Gold Water or something,
Yeah.
If he will win, then there will be a war, a nuclear war. So don't go vote for him. Just vote Johnson.
So you can see directly, two of the most powerful emotions, maybe one of the most powerful emotions that people can feel, maybe is the feeling of, protection for uh, vulnerables, using that to uh, and the fear that's created by um, uh, the prospect that vulnerable uh, children are going to be harmed as a result. The attempt is to use that fear to get votes. By the way, it's actually an interesting thing. It's a kind of uh, a pacifist ad. Usually it's much harder to get people fired up to go and kill each other. It's harder to get people fired up to um, uh, to vote for a less extreme uh, president. So that's an interesting thing. But that's an example of a direct appeal to the people. The indirect approach we've already seen, right? So, for instance, the bandwagon argument: everybody believes such and such, does such and such, and therefore you should believe or do such and such. Be one specific case of this. I won't go through. Um, well, maybe why don't we have somebody read
Okay, sir. I will read
the appeal to tradition here.
somewhere.
From here, the appeal to tradition up to here.
I think you must share your screen first.
Oh, I'm not sorry. I forgot to reshare my screen. Yeah, from here, from the appeal to tradition.
The appeal to tradition is yet another variety of the indirect appeal to the people. It occurs when an arguer cites the fact that something has become a tradition as grounds for some conclusion. The claim that something is a tradition is basically synonymous with the claim that a lot of people have done it that way for a long time. Examples: traditionally, professional sporting events have been preceded by the national anthem. Therefore, professional sporting events should continue to be preceded by the national anthem. Serving turkey on Thanksgiving Day is a long-standing tradition. Therefore, we should serve turkey next Thanksgiving Day.
Okay, so just pause there. So, what's the thought in these um, two cases? Um, so look, there's going to be something more if you wanted to actually defend the carrying on of whatever particular tradition it is. Just the fact that it's been there forever is not by itself evidence absent some further premise, right? Maybe the tradition has been a good tradition, or it'll be cost to changing it, or people are going to feel bad. Those are all things you need to have in addition to that initial claim. Um, and I like this on um, the middle of the screen. Very general schema. I'll put that in the chat box also. You want to be accepted, included in the group, loved, esteemed. Therefore, you should accept X, Y, Z as true. That's a nice general schema for arguments. I guess the Latin word is this word, ad populum. So let's come then to the second category that we're going to discuss out of Hurley's categorization, and that's this argumentum ad hominem. And the term ad hominem really just means, at the person, directed at the person. So you think of Homo sapiens, in the root homo is for man or person, so ad hominem is against the person. And what I want to do is just maybe go through 2 or 3 examples for you to get a flavor of what the problem might be with this kind of argument. So when we, in fact, Hemant, you can just go ahead and read just some of the examples. Let's start with this television entertainer, Bill Maher.
Should I read?
Yeah.
Television entertainer Bill Maher argues that religion is just a lot of foolish nonsense, but Maher is an arrogant, shameless, self-righteous pig. Obviously, his arguments are not worth listening to.
Okay, now let's look at this other one.
Dr. Phil. Dr.
Yeah.
Phil argues that mutual self-esteem is essential to a good marriage. But Dr. Phil is not terribly well educated and he never attended an Ivy League college, thus his arguments are worthless.
Okay.
Third one.
Why don't we
Billionaire investor.
Yeah.
Billionaire investor Warren Buffett argues that wealthy people should be required to pay more taxes. I would remind Mr. Buffett that he is free to send a check to the Department of the Treasury anytime he likes.
Okay. Good arguments, bad arguments. What's your analysis? Let's say of the Bill Maher case. Why does Maher think it's a? Why does Hurley think it's a fallacy?
I think the fallacy is there because the arguer is not telling anything about the arguments. Basically, he is attacking the person itself, himself or herself. So,
okay. What about the Dr. Phil case?
Basically, it's the case. It's the same case here because he is saying that Dr. Phil doesn't attend an Ivy League college and he is not well educated, so his arguments are worthless.
So you see the key. So any thoughts on either of these? I agree with Hemant, but Mukul, go ahead.
The example that we discussed in the beginning, I think it's the similar case, argument against the person. So just because that person is not qualified enough doesn't mean that it's not a good enough reason to discard his argument. So
okay,
that way it's a fallacy.
Sujit?
Yes, sir. Exactly what Mukul said. That there are no valid proofs to accept the arguments that the arguer is making.
So in all of these cases, I agree with with what you guys say. You notice that the formula is always that the other person has an argument, right? Bill Maher argues. We may not know what the argument is, or Dr. Phil has an argument, and Warren Buffett has an argument. In these cases, you're responding to somebody who has an argument, but you don't respond to the argument itself. You respond to something else, right? And what you respond to is that person, some fact about Bill Maher, that he's arrogant, or some fact about Dr. Phil, he doesn't have formal education, some fact about Warren Buffett. It's interesting that it's maybe harder to see this as an attack, but as Hurley points out, it has the same form. Instead of replying to Mr. Buffett's argument, the second arguer directs his attention to Mr. Buffett himself and suggests dash dash dash. So the structure of an ad hominem argument is when you deflect attention from the substance of somebody's argument to some fact about the person. That's why it's an argument against the person. And as Hurley points out, and this is very true in India as well, right? A common form of the ad hominem abusive occurs when the responding arguer's retort is to suggest that the opposing arguer consider going somewhere else, such as out of the country, America, love it or leave it. If you don't like things here, why don't you go to Pakistan? The important thing is to note that characteristic shift from the content of what somebody is arguing to some fact about them. And once we talk about the facts about that person, well, we forget all about it. It's very easy to forget all about the content of what they've said. So as Hurley points out, this is, there are these three types. There's the abusive, there's the circumstantial, and then there's the, I don't know how you pronounce that. So the what we've just looked at are, and these would be, if you looked up a textbook or whatever, the standard, when people usually just use the term ad hominem arguments, and they usually have this ad hominem abusive in mind, where you're not responding to a person's argument, but you're responding to some fact about their character, and that's a way of deflecting attention from the content of their argument. But the other two also are quite interesting and subtle. So let's take a look at some further examples. So when we have now, let's switch somebody else to read from Hemant. Any other volunteer? Okay. So why don't you read the Dalai Lama case? This one.
Okay. Dalai Lama argues that China has no business in Tibet and that the West should do something about it. But the Dalai Lama just wants the Chinese to live so he can return as leader. Naturally, he argues this way. Therefore, we should reject his arguments.
Okay, so why don't you carry on this rest of the passage? Yeah.
Yes, fine. The author of this argument ignores the substance of Dalai Lama's argument and attempts to discredit it by calling attention to certain circumstances that affect the Dalai Lama, namely that he wants to return to Tibet as its leader, but the fact that the Dalai Lama happens to be affected by these circumstances is irrelevant to whether his premises support a conclusion. The ad hominem circumstantial is easy to recognize because it always takes this form. Of course, Mr. X argues this way. Just look at the circumstances that affect him.
Just pause there. Let's just put this also into the chat. So why is this a fallacy? Well, it's still a fallacy because we're not talking about the content of the argument that's being offered. And that's the fundamental reason that it's a fallacy, and in particular, a fallacy of relevance. Right? When you're given an argument, the only question from a critical thinking perspective to ask is, well, what's the substance of the argument, and whether the premises support a conclusion. That's the question that's the critical thinking question applied to any argument at all. So whenever you're asking something that's not about the argument but about the arguer, then you might be, well, you're committing this fallacy. And the difference between the circumstantial and the abusive is just this, that you're not, here you're not abusing the Dalai Lama or imputing motives, but you just think, look, it's natural that he has an interest in doing this, so of course he would do this. Where, yeah, go ahead, Sujit.
So do we talk about the personal benefits here?
Yeah, we're saying that look, this person has a personal stake in this outcome, and I mean, the fact of the matter is you can have a personal stake in an outcome and nevertheless still have the right, you know, be correct about that outcome that you want. But did I not answer your question? No. I mean, the point is just that here we're not, you know, it's ad hominem because we are deflecting attention from the content of a person's argument to some fact about them, but we're not making some independent attack on that, on them. We're just saying, look, we're pointing to this fact about their uh, um, uh, about their situation, about their circumstances, um, as a reason not to take what they're saying seriously. Can you think of other examples of ad hominem circumstantial? Can you construct an example?
I think there was this one example we did earlier while doing deductive arguments that extremists are probably the ones starting the elections because every time there's an election, there are riots and it always benefits the extremists. So they are the ones that are responsible for the riots. So do you think it's an example of ad hominem circumstantial?
So remember, in an ad hominem circumstantial, if you look at this this diagram, you always have an argument. So the ad hominem circumstantial is in the context of somebody who's presenting an argument. When A1 is presenting the argument, like the Dalai Lama is presenting an argument for some particular conclusion, and then the fallacy arises in the response to that argument. So the extremist case, I can see why you think it's relevant, because there also you're pointing to like the interest of a person, what's in some, or to explain their action. They're probably caused by extremists because the extremists benefit. So that's why you picked up on that context, on that commonality. But in that case, we don't have a what's at stake is not somebody else's argument being discussed or not being discussed. That's the difference.
Yeah, I understand.
That makes sense?
Yes, yes, I understand.
It's a bit like, so I'm trying to think of somebody who says, so think about, I don't know, Indian states. What's the Indian state with the I don't know, the best human development index or the lowest poverty rate?
I think it's Kerala.
Kerala, right? So why do people say that, by the way? On what basis do they say that it has the best, let's say, human development index?
I think maybe there are some factors. I don't know what are the total factors.
Yeah, a bunch of statistics, right? There'll be like poverty rates
I think
and
we can
literacy
check.
rates, and there'll be. Yeah, Sujit, sorry.
Yeah, mostly I heard of is education that literacy rate is very high there.
Yeah, literacy
So
rate.
literacy rate is high, and
Yeah.
maybe poverty rates are low. Maybe I don't know, maternal mortality rates are low. There'll be a bunch of these facts to be ready.
Basic healthcare is good there, I think.
And now, so now suppose a whole bunch of people in IIT are having an argument about this, and the person, and and there's somebody from Kerala who says, hey, in fact, the state that has the best human development index is Kerala. There may be many ways of refuting that, right? You could say, no, look, in fact, you're wrong, because actually this other state is has better maternal mortality rates, and this other state has better education outcomes. All of those things would be responding to the substance of the claim. But if you just said, yeah, of course you're going to say that we don't have to take seriously what you're saying because, of course, you will defend your home state. Then one is in this business of committing this fallacy because of the fact that you're in this relationship to this argument doesn't undermine the argument itself. That's the key. And then the third kind is this U2 fallacy. So Sujit, why don't you read this example?
Yes, sir. Kim Kardashian argues that women should not have children out of wedlock, but who is she to talk? She gave birth to her daughter North without being married. Clearly, Kardashian's argument is not worth listening to.
This is like the first example that we looked at, right? Somebody is making giving you an argument to study more or get married before you have a child. Presumably, again, we have to ask them what are their reasons for saying that and examine whether those are good reasons or not. And this form of the argument is really, who are you to talk? After all, you've done exactly the same thing that you now want me not to do. And there again, the reason it's a fallacy of relevance is that this fact doesn't bear directly on whether the reasons that are being offered are good reasons or not. There's a kind of term in current political discourse that maybe it's not that current. Certainly a few years back, it was more current. That should remind you of this two coke fallacy. Do you know what I have in mind? You come across this term.
Which term can you repeat?
You come across this term, whataboutism? Or
no, sir. What about
it? Anyone's no, nobody's come across this.
No, sir. No.
Huh. So it's just a few years back. I think that there was all the rage. I think that people talk about a lot. So what's the context? The context. I mean, it's not just in India, elsewhere as well. But for instance, around the time of the 2014 general elections, one of the big objections to the election of our current prime minister was his alleged role in the 2002 Gujarat riots. And whenever this was brought up by a political opponent, or at least one of the responses of the BJP when this was brought up by political opponents was to say, hey, if you're a Congress member, for instance, what about 1984? How can you talk about this? About why should somebody implicated in these riots be elected to the prime ministership of this country when you belong to a party that has been complicit in riots and protected people who've been riot accused? So that's an example of this this mode of whataboutery, where again the content of what somebody says is kind of deflected onto some fact about their behavior in the past. Okay, I see that unfortunately, my laptop is running out of battery, so I'm going to switch back to my desktop, which doesn't have a camera. So I'm afraid we're going to have to live with that. So I'm just going to stop recording and then quickly jump back on to the desktop. Stop.